Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Chapters. We're here to feature authors, editors, and publishers in the region around West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, and maybe points beyond. I'm your host, Carter Seaton, and we're delighted to be here. And we're especially delighted to have Bonnie Proudfoot as our guest today. Bonnie moved to the Appalachian region in 1979, and we're going to find out why in a little while. And she's lived here since. She's taught for many years at Hocking College in Nelsonville, Ohio. She's a fiction writer, a poet, and a glass artist. And Goshen Road, which we're going to talk about today, is her first book. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Carter. Thanks for inviting me. I'm
Delighted
delighted to be here.
Yeah, well, we're thrilled to have you. All right, let's start at the very beginning, which is always a good place to start. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Born in New York City, grew up in Queens, New York, went away to college in Buffalo, New York, and fell in love with a guy named David Proudfoot, whose family was from Burlington, West Virginia.
Oh, yeah.
And all those aunts and cousins and all of those extended family members. His dad had 8 brothers and sisters, and we took off for the great, wild, wonderful West Virginia. We took a couple of trips down to visit his family, and then we just wanted to buy some land and move down to West Virginia, and we did.
Were you part of the, what I would call the hippie homestead movement?
It was, yeah. Come to think of it, it was. It certainly was in the mid '70s to late '70s. Exactly right.
And what was your intention? Were you going to homestead?
You know that eat a lot of peaches, plant a little garden. I was already a glass artist. I learned that when I lived in Buffalo, where I met David, and I thought, well, I'll just do the Mountain State Arts and Crafts Fair and do Harper's Ferry and set up a little shingle and go and it was. West Virginia was a source of all glass at the time.
Yes.
Between Wismach and Blanco and all of the wonderful glass you can get your hands on to do stained glass. So that was a big draw.
And were you successful at putting out your shingle and going to those fairs?
It was a thrill. I loved it. My family came from New York. I had babies in backpacks, and we were at the Mountain State Arts and Crafts Fair. You know the whole story.
Yes,
I know
absolutely.
You've heard it before.
I've been there before.
Granny was there with it. We loved the culture and the beauty, and it was very inspiring, really inspiring. It just seemed like the minute we drove down the very first time, dogwoods were in bloom, and every hillside was covered with white flowers. You couldn't tear yourself away.
Yeah. What made you move from Burlington to Fairmont?
So we never did live in Burlington.
Oh, you didn't?
We quickly settled in right outside Fairmont. David got a job teaching at Grafton Middle School, and then all we talked about was we have to get some land. So then we moved to Wetzel County from Fairmont.
I see. Okay.
And his family is still in Burlington area. There's tons of Proudfoots over
Yeah.
there, and he moved back to family land that belonged to his
I
uncle,
see.
his father's twin brother. So he's living on a big farm, beautiful farm, and even today he has gorgeous gardens. Our son got married there. It's spectacular.
Oh, that's great.
Yep.
But you still continue to do glass.
I do.
Okay.
It's been a lifelong exploration.
And when did you leave West Virginia then to go to Ohio?
Well, I wanted to go further in education. You know, our marriage broke up, and I was a little uncertain about what my future would hold, and I had a bachelor's in art and English education from Fairmont State, and then I thought, well, I'll teach. So I went to West Virginia University for master's in English, but by then I was doing a lot of creative writing. And then I thought, I'll get the PhD, and I wanted to go to Ohio University. So it was '96.
I see. Okay. And did you get the PhD?
No, I did all the coursework and got seduced away. You know, it's expensive, and the people I know who finished their PhDs were just so determined, and God bless them, they did a wonderful job. But sometimes they had a spouse
Yes.
that supported them. And, I had 2 boys in student loans, and so... But I don't regret anything about my career. I love teaching in a community college, and I had a nice career doing that.
So I read someplace that you started Goshen Road as part of what would have been your thesis.
Right, exactly right. And so when I worked, I don't know if you know who Gail Adams is, but she was the head of creative writing at
Okay.
West Virginia University, and I worked with her and came up with some stories. I wasn't thinking of it as a whole novel. And wrote them and got some feedback on them and some good response, but also didn't know where I wanted to go with them at all. Then when I went to Hollins for a year and got a second master's degree and worked some more on that and worked on some poetry also, but still, same characters just kept coming back, and really they started to have a life of their own, to be honest. And I loved writing stories, but I wasn't thinking of a novel. And then once I got to graduate school, I thought, I'm going to need a project to get a PhD with. But I was torn in different directions. A PhD program is a very, you do a lot of self-questioning. And I don't know if I had the confidence to really follow the project where it could take me. And I thought, oh, this isn't contemporary storytelling. It's not edgy. It doesn't have that sort of like postmodernism that everybody's going for these days. I sort of set it aside, and I didn't validate it enough, I don't think. Although, trust me, it's not like I didn't think about it and try to figure out how to, and I also had the middle of something, but I didn't have a beginning and I didn't have an ending.
That's unusual. Usually it's the opposite.
I
You've
know.
got a beginning and no
never
middle or end.
plotted it exactly, and it took many, many years. Kept it aside, set it aside, but had these characters and these stories. And I think there's a little pressure on me. Well, if I ever do have a thesis, I can always resurrect this, right, and get my PhD. But then I thought, okay, first of all, that's not realistic. And second of all, I'm not getting any younger. And this is a legacy, in a way, for my boys who are getting older, to see, even though the characters aren't us, to gain insight into the times.
Yeah.
So I began to just take it seriously as a project. I began to see the worth of it. And I think I needed some distance from the academy to say, I have a body of work. Plus, I read a lot, and I began to say, this becomes piece. It can be fit in. It's not as far back as Lee Smith, for example. It's not as like rugged as like maybe Pinckney Benedict's stories, but it has a contemporary feeling, and it moves in the direction of women's issues and concerns. Wasn't a lot of material about that. So I think mentally I started validating the project. And I don't want to blame it on the academy. I don't want to say, because I really think had I brought it to professors and said, this is what I want to do. But you know what? I did it on my own terms, too.
There's value in that.
Not with some oversight of a classroom, right?
Right. Did you write poetry in the meantime?
I did.
Yeah.
I always wrote poetry.
Did you?
Yeah.
That was what
Even
you did?
at WVU, I
So
wrote
that's
poetry.
what you did first, and then you turned to fiction?
I think fiction terrified me.
Poetry terrifies me, so
Well, the
good
more
for
you write poetry, the more terrifying it is. It's kind of, right. So many of my heroes, right? Like Elizabeth Bishop, say, and some of the, that sort of like, I immersed myself in poetry, and I thought, oh my God, maybe I can, do this type of, even, I look way back to Emily Dickinson, and they were my inspiration. But then fiction, I was like, well, it's always male. There was that male thing going on. So I had to I think I had to discover people like Lee Smith. And then realize that this is accessible for women too, right? All the heroes were guys, right? When you grow up. And I didn't want to write that story.
Right. So tell me, so let's just tell us a little bit about the plot of Goshen Road.
I think that if you say, is it plotted conventionally, the answer would be not.
No.
I
Right.
think that it's a linked narrative in the way maybe Louise Erdrich wrote Love Medicine, which is a family saga, stories that intertwine and intersect about a whole generation of life, and that in a way it's the sum of it comes up to the self-actualization of the two main female characters.
You tell it from more than one point of view, too.
Right, I do.
So that makes it a little different than the strict.
Right. And as did Louise Erdrich and other people who wrote those linked narrative forms. It's a freedom in a way. I think people can keep a character in mind even if that character isn't central to a particular story. I could start with Lux and Jesse, and then I could move to, Alan, Ray, and Billy, and even the children, and people in the back of their mind are going, well, what's going on with Lux and Jesse now? They don't always have to be central
Right.
for them to still be foregrounded in the reader's mind.
Right.
Once you care about a character, you're always wondering in the back of your mind. It's sort of like Little Women or something, right?
Where are they?
Oh, what
Right.
is Amy doing now? And what's that show up to?
So you said these characters weren't you, and it wasn't your story exactly. But obviously, your days as a homesteader inspired, influenced, and informed what you've written.
Correct.
Are the characters in any way people that you knew, even if they're not you?
So every character is kind of a hodgepodge.
Okay.
I think they had to be. I did not want to. I wanted people to maybe recognize little parts of themselves, but not. I didn't want to bait. Like nobody came out fully hatched based on somebody.
Right. Okay. I understand that.
And so, as a storyteller, you have that ability to do it. A lot of it's my mom and aunt,
Oh,
and they aren't even from West Virginia.
so that
the
would
two
be
sisters.
Desi and
That
Billy.
would be Desi
Yeah.
and Billy. And the way my poor aunt got picked on by my dad when they were dating and some of those things, a lot, And you can say, well, did that happen in West Virginia? No, but
Doesn't matter.
It didn't matter,
It did,
right?
right,
But
yeah.
if you live through it, and I was a first daughter, and in the family, everybody else was sons, the only daughter, right? And in and out of my aunt and my mom's house interchangeably. And my aunt was younger, and my mom was the older one, serious, more stern, more demanding.
Your aunt was more like Billy.
Yeah, my aunt was right. But there's also some of my neighbors, right, and the lifestyle that we lived, and we were very immersed in the community that we lived in, and so I think some of that that gave me like the genesis of, because I think the place is a character
Yes.
in this novel
Right.
too, which I loved, and yet it's that thing, William Butler Yeats, Terrible Beauty.
Some of your characters and maybe their situations reminded me a little bit of the characters and situations in Ann Pancake's Strange as This Weather Has Been. But the difference is, of course, that her characters are torn about whether to stay in West Virginia or leave. Yours have no real desire to do that. They're just accepting life as it comes to them and trying to make the best of it.
Right, and I think of a lot of the Appalachian writers who, some of their stories, they just came back, and now they're like, oh my God, I'm going to deal with this place, right? Or they're going to move somewhere, right? But, and I think if I continued this and went into a sequel, Lissy would move on in
Would she?
places and That's all I'm going to say about that.
Uh-huh. So it sounds like you are working on something.
No, just mentally.
Yeah.
Like, I do think I think because I comfortably said it in the past, my character.
You're talking about the daughter of
I'm
Leslie.
talking about, right, Desi and Lux's
Yes,
daughter. I
right.
think she may have a life of her own, though I don't want to. I mean, you can't talk about something that's not in the
No,
novel.
right.
Right, but eventually, right? So that could happen, and because it's really hard to stay.
Yes.
It's awfully hard to stay. But because the timetable is set comfortably in the past.
Yeah, it runs from what, 60?
It runs from 67 to about 92 or
Right.
so.
Right.
And there still were maybe sawmills and timber jobs, and
yes.
not every mine had closed, so they bought the props, and the hardwood flooring industry and
Was still there,
was still
right.
there. Right.
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 Yeah.
Right.
I loved some of these scenes. You've got one that reminded me of me as a child, sitting on their beds reading 17 magazine. Every teenager that I knew growing up at that time
That's
did that.
flat
it's
out
just
biography.
it's got to be. I knew it had to be. And the wives watching soap operas, and that my mother did that religiously, and then of course the dealing with her husbands and the televangelists. It all just rang so true.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it really did.
I lived through some of that.
Yeah, sure. I think anybody who grew up or was, semi-adult or late teens at that time did.
Right. Right.
And I think that's the way you tell it. Like you said, it's a woman's story, really. Well, it's both, but it really centers on those two sisters.
Right.
Makes it so real because that's just what we experienced.
Right.
You know.
Right. Right.
So I love that.
Yeah, and they took on a life of their own. They're not me, right? I kept asking myself. I mean, I'd go for a walk with my dog, and what would Billy really say, right? And in ways, I think my biggest concern was making the characters feel real, and it's horrifying how many stereotypes there are about Appalachian characters.
Yes.
And none of the people I knew were like that, right? And so I think I kept saying, I don't want anyone to. I mean, problems happen. Problems happen in families, and problems happen in Appalachian families. They happen in every family, right?
Right.
And women went through a certain period in growth where they had to learn how to address their spouses head on, or they were going to drown in their own disappointment, right? And that is universal, right?
Sure,
Not just
right.
Appalachian, but I kept thinking, if I didn't want to betray the sort of gift I was given of having access to people's lives. This is kind of the way I could think about it.
When you thought about this book, as you pulled it out of the orphan drawer, as I would say,
That's a good way to put it.
did you have a theme in mind or a general overall, here's what I'm trying to say kind of thought? Or were you just wanting to tell a good story?
I wanted to tell a good story, but I also wanted to say that it's not like the way the rest of the world sees people. It says not enough people just drive right through the state, right? And
they think they know what
they
we're
think
all
they
like.
know what's going on,
what we're all about,
and
right.
I thought my thinking was that there are some extreme pressures that choosing to stay in West Virginia culturally imposed on my characters. And sometimes it sunk them and sometimes they rose to it, right? And yet I know so many people who are so tied to this beautiful land would not leave.
Right.
Not one bit. Despite the fact that life could pile hardship on top of hardship even. And they knew that was happening. That leaving just sometimes wasn't an option.
Yeah.
Keeping a family together was important, even if the family wasn't perfect, right?
Right. Well, think about all the people who live in the floodplains of West Virginia, for instance, and no matter
Oh, my
how
goodness.
much they flood,
Right,
they come back.
right, right.
They still build back on that same land, and people don't understand that, but home is home, and I think that's a real connection to this land that maybe some other people in other states don't feel.
It is, you pay a price, but it's also your point of pride,
Yeah.
in a way.
And I think it's just, West Virginians and Appalachians, maybe in general, had to work so hard to eke out their living when they first came in the 1700s. And those stories have passed down generation through generation, and you almost feel like you're betraying that if you're the one that decides
Right.
to get up and
My-
leave.
My ex's family, they did come in the 1700s. And my ex-father-in-law, who just passed last year, he was educated in a one-room schoolhouse. He had a twin brother. They took turns going to school. One would go, and then and they had to walk, of course, and it's really true. We always made fun of them. Oh, you walked all these miles, but they really did.
Yeah.
Or the horse, some farm cart would take them to school. But then he went to West Virginia University, became a chemical engineer.
Yeah.
And he went to Eastman Kodak, but his brother stayed in a beautiful farm,
right.
gorgeous farm.
Right. Meredith Sue Willis wrote a really wonderful review of your book, and I want to read just a part of
She
it.
did, I feel so gifted.
It says, "What's remarkable to me about this book is that Proudfoot does not bewail the fate of people whose chosen lifestyle isn't working out, nor does she bewail the bright girls who get pregnant and drop out of high school. She walks a narrow line in portraying the richness of this way of life without romanticizing it. People are unfaithful to one another. They have babies, probably too soon. They often have narrow views, and they don't live up to their own ideals. She recognizes them as intelligent and creative and determined, and recognizes the pain of their collapsed dreams." I think that is so true and makes you such an empathetic writer, because you have figured that out in those characters.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that must have partly come from your life as a homesteader, because
It
so many
absolutely
of
did.
those people who came here did not leave, despite how hard it was to eke out a living as a subsistence farmer so that they could do their craft or whatever their chosen field was.
Right?
And I recognize that the story could have been set elsewhere, but West Virginia does seem to inform it. Like you said, the location is also a character.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
I lived on a road that needed a lot of attention and that terrified the living daylights out of my mom when she came to visit. And, I'm not going to say exactly how much of it is autobiographical, but there's quite a lot of the effort and the work that we, to just sort of stave off disaster. And, I didn't want to make the whole book about homesteading
Yes.
exactly.
No,
but,
it really isn't.
But I also wanted a character, and Meredith Sue just said it beautifully, like, what man wouldn't want his own land,
Yes,
right? And wouldn't want to fight in every possible way
to keep it.
to keep it, right? So the moment Lux was a hard one for me to write, but I will say this, I owe...
Lux, the character of Lux.
yeah. I owe a debt to Meredith Sue because part of one of the chapters I wrote in a workshop that she led.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's
right.
great.
And that was a chapter where Lux describes proposing
Uh-huh.
to
Yeah,
Desi.
right. I think your poetry also comes through in this book, because some of your descriptions are they're just lyrical, but they're also such wonderful descriptions. This one says, "The school bus looked like it just rolled out of the crayon box." That is just so perfect. The yellow school bus is just right out of the box. And
Thanks.
gray eyes turned as flat as the heads of steel tracks. Did you find that having been a poet and continuing to be one helped you in the descriptions and the way you wrote? Did it just come that much more naturally to you? Sometimes we struggle with descriptions, but you don't seem to.
That's a lovely question, and thank you for saying that. Sometimes I stopped and I asked, how would it feel to this character? How would they see this, right? And I also showed this book to two friends of mine, and one was a poet, and I wanted to figure out places that a poet would respond. So they didn't suggest that language, but I just thought, where can I go with this description, and maybe we'll catch the eye of a person that I was going to show. So who you show your books to, I think we were talking about that before.
Yeah.
Having a reader that raises the bar.
Right, yes. And raises questions that you hadn't thought of.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
that's
Right.
wonderful.
Right.
So I assume you must be a lifelong reader as well.
I am.
Do you have favorite authors?
I go back to Lee Smith. I read her all the time. It's just delightful in so many ways. I love her short stories. Me and My Baby, Watch the Eclipse. I just think that's so wonderful. Bob, a dog, is one of those characters. I love the work of. I'm on two fences. I like Grace Paley and I like Flannery O'Connor. You know. I read a lot of short stories. I recently read In the Mountains, Charles Dodd White, gorgeous book and heartbreaking too. Chris Holbrook's short stories are fantastic. Not just female authors, but male.
Yeah, right.
Both of those folks are real craftsmen. I read Patron Saint of Ugly because
Oh, isn't that
I
wonderful?
love
Yeah,
that book. Oh
yeah.
my God!
Yeah, that's
and
Marie
Marie
Manila's.
Manila was kind
Yeah.
enough to write a blurb, and I thought, I'm going to read her book. And
It's
I couldn't
wonderful.
put it down, and I raved about it to everybody that
It's a good one.
Right.
Yeah.
And right now I'm reading a book called Patchtown, 40 Patchtown. Just came out. It's a novel on Bottom Dog Press, and it's about a coal mine strike.
Oh, wow.
So I'm very grounded, I think, in this region.
How do you find time to teach, do your own glass, and write?
Comfortably retired, except I do teach one class. And I force myself to write because I have writing groups.
Ah, that's good.
I love
Yes.
I have two different writing groups.
Workshop writing groups?
And very small groups. We show each other our work. We
Yeah.
meet monthly. And if not for that, I'd be an old turtle sunning myself on a log, not doing anything.
Yeah, I understand that. So you think you've got something else coming, but you're just still mentally thinking about it, right?
I had a short story that I started working that I'm reworking now and going to maybe get out. And I have a couple of ideas for
that's
a second
good.
novel. But if it takes as long as this first one, I'll just shoot myself.
Well, maybe you won't have to put it in a drawer and leave it for 20 years now that you've got a
I
little more
think
time, you're
I
retired.
couldn't have written this book 20 years ago.
Yes, I understand that.
The characters had to perk.
Yeah. Once you pulled it out, well, you said these were written as kind of standalone stories, so you probably don't outline, but a lot of people do. Your writing routine is probably very different from that.
This is my only novel. So I have
So you don't
thought,
have
if
a
I'm going to
routine
start
yet.
another novel, would I plot it or not plot it? Would I want one character's voice to drive the whole thing, or do I like the idea of
Yes.
bouncing back and forth from one character to the next? You know, I
Would the story drive it?
will just have to wait.
Yeah.
So like I said, I was raised in and out of two sisters' homes. My mom and dad, and the troubles they had, whatever, and the love and confusion that they had also. Same thing with my aunt and her husband and the cousins, right? So I couldn't not make it
Sure.
multivocal.
Right, I understand that.
It seemed like, I don't know, maybe it's my temperament. We need each other. And it comes together. Maybe
Well,
if
I
I
think-
find one like solitary character to drive a story, and that's going to be her quest,
Yeah,
then I'll be able to do that with
Right.
just one character taking it the whole way.
right.
But I don't think I never felt like I could cut off Billy to the expense of Desi.
No, I wouldn't have thought so either with this one. No,
Right,
definitely
right.
not.
They care about each other too
Right,
much.
right. Well, it's a wonderful book. What is your writing routine? Do you have one?
I put everything on a Google Doc, and I take it with me wherever I go.
Ah, that's good. That's a good idea.
I never get it out of my.
Yeah, right.
And every barista in Athens knows me
Yeah,
probably.
so you just go in and work on it.
Right, and then if I look back at it and I can probably red pencil as much as I write sometimes. You know, we all know that feeling
Mm-hmm. Yes.
like, where did I think I was going?
Where
with
was I going,
But
right?
often if you keep a little distance, like you come back a day or two later, you'll find something that really did work and that you
Mm-hmm.
really truly wanted to say even. And Gail Adams gave me this advice once: stop when you're in the middle of something.
Yeah.
Don't finish the whole scene.
Yes, I understand that.
Stop when you know you want to say more,
Right.
because then you won't face writer's block because you've left unfinished business that's still like
In your
cooking
head.
in your brain.
Right,
Right?
right. That's great. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you.
We really appreciate it. Bonnie, thank you so
appreciate it.
much for visiting us today. I know that our viewers are going to want to read Goshen Road. It's a terrific book. And we also want to thank Inner Geek for being our support here today and allowing us to set up these interviews here. And we hope that you'll come down and buy Bonnie's book as well as those of others who have been on the show. We'll see you again in our next segment. Thanks for visiting. Bye-bye.
Connect with Chapters via email. Write to lp4@zoom.email. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, and follow. All chapter episodes are available on YouTube. Visit Armstrong's YouTube channel. Follow Armstrong. And look for a playlist of all the chapters programs.